So, good morning, everybody.
Good
Today,
morning.
we're dedicating our Torah studies and the tzedakah that we'll be giving and the prayer we just said to, first of all, it's the yard site today of Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, the wife of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Today is her day of passing. And it is also the day when tragically the four holy souls and bodies of four hostages have been returned to Eretz Yisrael, and I guess they're being identified as we speak. And I think today, for me, and again, I'm talking only for myself, is one of the I was feeling such anxiety the past day and a half, and I don't know why, but I think it's because of this. This is
Yeah,
really
yeah,
the crown of the most horrific part of the whole almost 2 years of the war, because it's the children. Not that any of the younger soldiers or families
yeah,
that were wiped out, but is the
yeah.
children. And to me, they were like a ray of hope that they are alive and that they'll come home to their father. And it's just
Yeah.
such a horrific feeling. So as Jews, like the Rebbe quoted when Rabbi Lau by the Six-Day War spoke to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, "What's happening? What are people saying in Israel?" And Rabbi Lau said, "People are saying, was wird sein, what will be, what will be." And the Rebbe said, "Jeden sagen nicht, was wird sein, jeden sagen, was kann man tun." Jews don't say what will be. Jews say, what can we do? What can we do? But before we discuss what can we do, we have to ask why. And the very fact that we're able to ask why shows that God exists and that we have belief and faith in God. Because if we didn't believe there's a God that's running the world with all its horrific, tragic events unfolding, then there is no why. Then we just have random chaos. So the why, to me, brings comfort. The fact that we can cry out to God and say why brings hope already, because we believe in Hashem and we believe that there must be more to that what we are experiencing and can see as the finite humans living on earth. And the question is, one of the people asked Elie Wiesel once, is silence part of human Jewish tradition? Are we silent in Jewish tradition? Is that part of our way we deal with tragedy? And he said, no, silence is not part of our tradition, but we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it. But we know that when someone sits Shiva, when they come back from the funeral, the family eats a hard-boiled egg and a bagel, which is round and has no opening or closing, to symbolize that a mourner is silent. Because what can you say? What can you say when something so horrific happens? What can you possibly say? And, we always find comfort and direction from the Torah. That's our source. We don't have another place to look. And remember, we discussed this, when they finally dedicated the tabernacle in the desert, the Mishkan, the first day, the two sons of Aaron go in with the incense, Nadav and Avihu, and what happens? Their lives are taken because they didn't do what God told them to do. They brought a foreign fire, foreign incense into the tabernacle. And what happens when two children are taken all at once, so horrifically, so suddenly? Moshe comes to his older brother Aaron and he says, God said to me, I will be sanctified by those closest to me. And Moshe says to Aaron, I thought it would be me or you, that we would die for God's name. Instead, it's your sons, which means they're closest to God, because God's name is sanctified through them. And what's Aaron's response in that story? when his two sons are taken from him on this day that's supposed to be a glorious, exciting day. Vayidam Aaron. Aaron remains silent. What does this mean? Does it mean that when tragedy strikes, we remain silent? Does it mean there's no words? What does it mean exactly that Aaron remains silent? How are we to take this? Should we not cry out and scream? So I want to share another story that I think will bring light to what this means, that Aaron remains silent. It's not the way we think. It's not silence as victims. It's not silence as, what can I do? What can I do? No. There's the Kleisenberger Rebbe who settled in Israel after the Holocaust. And his 11 children and wife were cremated in Auschwitz. By a miracle, he survived. His entire family wiped out. And there was one son, they said, that survived the crematorium and ended up in a DP camp and died there from a terrible disease. Some people say the Kleisenberger didn't even know when he died. Was it in the DP camp or was it in the concentration? And the Kleisenberger Rebbe made his way back to Israel and settled there, remarried, and had children. And people came to the Kleisenberger Rebbe. There was a man that came to the Kleisenberger Rebbe and he said, Rebbe, how did you rebuild your life when 11 of your children were taken so viciously, horrifically, and your wife, and you had nothing left? So the Kleisenberger Rebbe looked at him and said, a pasuk from Yeshayahu, Isaiah, the book of the prophets, B'damecha Chaya, with your blood you shall live. So the Rebbe says to the chassid, to the fellow, do you understand what I'm saying? He says, Rebbe, I understand that even through the bloodshed and the killings and the murders, we don't allow this to take us down and destroy us as a Jewish nation, as Jewish people, as Jewish families. We rebuild and we get stronger and stronger. And the Kleisenberger said, no, that's not what I mean. That seems like the obvious response, but that's not what I mean, says the Kleisenberger. What does he mean, says the Kleisenberger Rebbe? The same word used by Aaron, B'damecha Chaya. The word silence, it also could mean blood, and it also means silence, because it says, Vayidam Aaron, Aaron was silent. I live through silence. What does this mean? I live through understanding that I don't understand. I can't wrap my brain around what happened to me, to my family, and to all of Israel. We can't wrap our brains around what happened to the Biba's children and wife, and all the ones that were killed and continue to be tortured by the Hamas, terrorists, Nazis, killers, murderers. It's not that we're silent because, hey, we don't know. Okay, you never know. You know, so it happens, it happens. We're silent in the way that we say that we can't understand God's plan. We can't understand why this is happening. That's our silence. Not saying, okay, let's not speak out, let's not fight back, let's not grieve, let's not mourn, let's not call out to God and say, why? Silence and knowing we don't know. That's the silence we're talking about. Knowing that we can't know. We can't know why this is happening and why it's happened in such a horrific manner. Who would believe it? Who would believe it? What's going on? So silence means that I respect the fact that I can't understand, but not silent that we don't protest. You cry, you grieve, you scream. We eliminate pain but we can't explain it. That's the thing. We have realized we can't explain it. It's the silence of not knowing how to explain what happened. I think this is how I'm personally dealing with it, knowing that you have to grieve and cry and support, but know that we can help with the pain, but we can't explain the pain. We can't explain what happened. It's beyond our understanding. It's beyond our understanding. So this, I think, is my way of approaching what happened. Why? We must always ask why. But thank God we can ask why, because we know there's a God to whom to ask. That's the thing. God forbid we didn't have a God. How could we explain this chaos? Then there's no hope for the future because there's no one running the world. It's man eat man, dog eat dog. Knowing there's a God and there's a divine plan that we don't understand is already comforting in a certain way, although there is no comfort in another way. So this is how I think this story of Aaron approaches the story of what happens when tragedy strikes unexpectedly, expectedly, and so on. Another thing we have to know is why is the whole world of Jewry, why is each and every one of us so hurt by this? Why does it affect us so deeply? Because there's a passage that says, Mi ka'amcha Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz. Who is like the nation of Israel? One in the land of Israel, in Israel. We are called the goy singular. The Jewish people are singular. We're called like one person. Why? Why does the Torah in so many places call us one person? Because that's exactly who we are. If a Jew is hurting in China, we're hurting in America. If a Jew is hurting in Mexico, we're hurting. It doesn't matter that it's your toe, which is so far removed from your brain, that got stubbed. You feel the pain because it's part of your body. It's far removed from your brain. Say, why does your stubbed toe hurt so much? It hurts sometimes more than a headache. It's so far removed from the head. But because the Jewish people are all one body, one soul, wherever it's hurting, we're hurting. There's no such a thing as we're not hurting. If you remember the Baelish trial, he was arrested for using blood at his Seder. Most ridiculous, who would believe? And what was the arguments? They brought texts from every part of the Torah. Now, Baelish was not a religious Jew. Why bring texts from the Torah, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the prophets? Exactly, because Jews, it doesn't matter if he considers himself a secular Jew, an Orthodox Jew, a Hasidic Jew, an atheistic Jew. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. The texts are one for everyone. An entire people came out for Baelish. People with sidelocks, people with modern garb. Everybody came. Why? Because he was a Jew. It didn't matter. Is he religious? What shul does he go to? Oh, he goes to that shul. I'm not going to go defend him. Oh, they don't daven there. Oh, they're not. Oh, he doesn't keep kosher. I can't go pray for him. When a Jew is hurting, it doesn't matter. What kind of Jew? Is he religious? Not religious? Dresses like this, dresses like that. He's part of me. He's me. It's me. My body hurting. Me, my soul is hurting. That's the strength of our people. That doesn't matter who you are, what you are. If you're a liberal, a Democrat, a Republican, doesn't matter. When a Jew hurts in Israel, when the Jew is a hostage, we're all hostages. And that's what I think also why it's so painful to us. And it resonates. Yiddish and Mama, we're all Jewish mothers that tears our guts out. You know, if you remember when you go shopping right in the store and your child hides, my kids used to hide under the clothing racks. They used to play a game with me in the store. And my heart would fall down for a second. Who took my child? That pain, that's the pain. When a child is taken, the pain is so pronounced. It's such an unsettling feeling looking at the mother and the children and the little redheaded kids, and it makes it even more painful because they stand out so much. They're so beautiful, their faces so pure and holy, and I don't know what to say. So as Jews, what do? We increase our mitzvahs, we increase our good deeds, we take on a mitzvah for the Bibas family, for every child. There's a mother, Kfir, Adir, and today was a bris, and they named the child Kfir Adir. Would you believe that? This is the Jewish nation. Today already a child was named after the Bibas boys. Isn't that something? A family that didn't know them personally, but this is who we are, one nation. We name our children after those who passed on. And know one thing that God says in the Torah, I will never, never not be vengeful against those. God can avenge and will avenge. So we have to also know that. My Baba used to say that Eibish's kemel nicht bal chayv. God will never be in debt to anyone. You get the good, and you'll also get what you deserve. We don't know when, where, how. We call out to God, say, God, it's up to you. But me personally, I'm thinking to myself, what special mitzvah can I take on? What can I do better? What can I do more? And so on. So one thing I thought to myself, I'll start lighting Shabbos candles a few minutes earlier. You know how it's the Shabbos rush, Friday, rush. Oh, candle lighting time, quick. My husband loves to call out candle lighting time. But if I could only start a little earlier, then I can light a little earlier and bring the spiritual light earlier. So that's something I'm thinking of doing, increasing in my tzedakah. That's another good thing I'd like to do. And I'm trying to think what other good mitzvahs I could take upon myself. But everyone should take upon 3 mitzvahs for the souls of the Bibas family. Their souls should be elevated, and God should see how we respond to bloodshed. We respond with goodness, with kindness. And that's how our response has to be as Klal Yisrael. So does anybody want to add anything, how you're dealing with the pain, how you're handling it, what you think? Remember, everyone grieves in their own way, you know? You can't tell a person how to grieve or how to feel.
I don't know what to say. I'm so sick to my stomach. I can't stop crying.
Yeah. It's just awful. It's awful. Yeah. And it was raining in Israel as they brought the holy souls back. There's pouring. If you looked at the videos, the heavens are crying. Surely God will come now with a strong hand. You know? First, I had a very vehement reaction that Israel should just bomb the place out. That's it. We're done after this. But again, you know, we have to protect our people. We have to protect our people, but that we leave to the Israeli government how to respond. But that's my gut reaction. Like, I just want to get back at them, you know? But here in America, we have to see what we could do as a Jewish nation in a positive way. So not to minimize the discussion on Israel and what's happening and our beloved family brought back in coffins instead of walking. Let's go to talk a little bit about the Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka. Just to give a little background, Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka's yahrzeit day of passing is today, and she is the wife of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, cousins actually, and her father was the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. So the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe appointed his son-in-law indirectly as the next Rebbe. Even though there was an older brother-in-law, everyone knew that the Rebbe would be the Rebbe next. Just knowing, a Rebbe is born a Rebbe. People always ask me, how is the Rebbe appointed? You're born a Rebbe, you don't become a Rebbe. So there was a friend of the Rebbetzin who escaped Russia, because the Rebbe and Rebbetzin escaped Russia through Paris, and they were all over, and they finally came to America. And when they came to America, there was an 80-year-old friend. Her name was Marazov. Her last name was Marazov, and she knew the Rebbetzin in Russia. She was a childhood friend, so she visited with the Rebbetzin. And the Rebbetzin asks her during their visit, do you remember what we discussed as girls? And she said, no, I don't. But really, she did know what she discussed as girls. And she told her family later that she remembers two things that the Rebbetzin told her. One, I never want to be the wife of a Rebbe. And two, she said, my father, who was the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, has no sons. He only had 3 daughters. Nechamadina married to the older son-in-law, Reb Shneir Zalman Shemayahu Gerari, her younger sister Shena, who was killed by the Nazis, and Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka was the middle sister. So Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka said, who will take over from my father? He only has daughters. So now why is this important to hear the story? Because when her father passed away, and everyone said that the Rebbe is going to take over, her husband's going to take over, her husband didn't want. The Rebbe was a very private person. He didn't want to become a public figure, a Rebbe, a leader. He wanted to live his life as a holy, pious Jew without recognition, behind the scenes. And the Rebbetzin was the same way. But she said to the Rebbe finally, who's going to continue my father's legacy if not you? There is no one else to be the next Rebbe. You have to be the Rebbe. And the Rebbe took on the leadership from his wife's encouragement, even though she said, I never want to be married to a Rebbe. And we see the Rebbetzin was never in 770, the Rebbe shul. She davened separately upstairs in a smaller part of the shul. She didn't come out in the public very often to mingle because she did not want the recognition. She didn't want the adulation. She didn't want people fussing over her. She was very private, but she was the foundation and partner of the Rebbe in his leadership. So many times the Rebbe indicated how the Rebbetzin energy and power fueled his leadership. There's so many stories with the Rebbetzin, so many stories, beautiful stories of the Rebbetzin, how in her own private way, she helped people, she advised people, she was extremely, extremely kind, sensitive, and brilliant. When she was a girl in Russia, her father, the previous Rebbetzin Rebbe, would take her with him on missions to help Jews, missions to get, different things because they were living in a country of persecution. And she was very astute and brilliant, and the Rebbe would give her assignments. It was a time they needed to get papers out of Germany. And so the Rebbe's older brother was going to go. The Rebbe didn't want his older brother to go to such a dangerous place, so he said he'll go. So the Rebbetzin said, no, I'm going. And she went to Germany, and she got out the paperwork that they needed for something. This was the Rebbetzin, such a beautiful person. She was having a conversation with a woman she knew in London. And the woman in London told the Rebbetzin, I'm worried, my granddaughter is now coming to New York, and she's all alone there. She doesn't have any family. She's going to high school in the Lubavitch Girls' School, and I'm concerned about her. And the Rebbetzin took down her name and her number and called her. She picks up the phone, and she says, who's this? And she says, this is Mrs. Schneerson. And the girl went crazy. And the Rebbe's wife is calling me. And she said, your grandmother mentioned she's worried about you. So I want to know, how are you doing? How are the classes going? Do you have friends? And she called her a few times to check up on her. And this was the Rebbetzin. Something very, very special about the Rebbetzin. That when someone needed her encouragement or her advice, she would be there for them. There was a woman, Esther Sternberg. Her father was very close to the Rebbe because he was a cousin. His name was Zalman Garari. So the Rebbe said to Rabbi Garari, who was also very wealthy, I want you to be in charge of the Rebbetzins' medical care. Because, you know, the Rebbe knew he had a lot of connections with doctors and medical professionals. And the Rebbetzin developed a terrible eye disease that was very dangerous. She could lose her sight. So they called Rabbi Garari, said, you know, we need an eye doctor, the Rebbe said. So Rabbi Garari, Zalman Garari, found out the top eye specialist in New York City. But the nurse, this receptionist, said there's a 6-month waiting list to get in. He says, you don't understand. This is a very special person. They said, we don't care. There's a 6-month waiting list. Rabbi Garari got into his car. He drove a Mercedes. He double parked in front of this Park Avenue office, ran upstairs, and says to the receptionist, I need to speak to the doctor right now. Who are you? My name is Rabbi Garari, and I need to speak to him. And he pushed his way in, and the doctor says, what can I do for you? And he says, well, there's a patient that must be seen. She's a very, very important woman. He said, who is this important woman? He says, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's wife, Mrs. Schneerson. She must be seen. The doctor was so amazed at his forceful, entry. He said, okay, bring her tomorrow morning. The doctor said. Now the story gets even more complicated. So the next morning he drove the Rebbetzin to the doctor. The doctor said, there's 2 procedures I could do, 2 little surgeries, but it's up to you which surgery to do. So on the way home, the Rebbetzin says to Rabbi Garari, Reb Zalman, which surgery should I do, A or B? So Rabbi Garari says, Rebbetzin, I don't know. When I have a question, I ask the Rebbe. The Rebbe is who you ask. She says, I can't ask my husband because he'll worry about me. And I don't want him to know that it's so severe, that it's so scary, because he won't be able to do his work. So Rabbi Garari says, but Rebbetzin, I don't know which procedure to choose. I always ask my Rebbe. She says, no, we're not asking the Rebbe. You have to decide for me. And Rabbi Garari went home and he was like, why? How can I decide for the Rebbetzin? So he put on his gartel, the Hasidic garb. He took out a pen and paper and he wrote a letter to the Rebbe. Rebbe, there's a person that needs eye surgery. They don't allow me to consult with you. But here's the 2 procedures. Which one should we do? What should I do? So the Rebbe called him up and said, Reb Zalman, tell me the 2 procedures. He tells him, he says, tell the Rebbetzin to do this one. The Rebbe choose which one. And Reb Zalman Garari never told the Rebbetzin that he asked the Rebbe. But she had it and she restored her eyesight. This is who the Rebbetzin was. She didn't even want to bother her own husband, the Rebbe, when it was necessary. But Reb Zalman was a very smart man, and the Rebbe and him kept the secret. She never knew. Maybe she did know, but she didn't let on. So it's very interesting that not always when a person is in the public eye, on every front page Instagram story, Facebook, magazine cover, news, is their power or influence noticed and recognized. Sometimes the greatest influence, as we know with the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, happens behind the scenes. It's not that you see them every day on Facebook. So of course there's influence. Every day there's a picture, they're eating out, which product to buy, which designer clothes to wear, their opinion on politics. The Rebbetzins' influence was one of subtle influence. Her subtlety and her behind the scenes influence was much more powerful than if she would have stood in front of 1,000 women or men and spoken. That was her power. That was her energy. That was her power and her energy. Like they say, when she used to light Shabbos candles, she didn't like when anyone was in the room with her, which meant there were people, there was always like a house butler, a house bacha, they called him, a young man who took care of things in the house because the Rebbe and Rebbetzin had no children. She didn't say, leave the room, I'm lighting Shabbos candles. Some people like to be very aggressive about their opinions. I need my peace and quiet. She had a subtle way that people knew to leave the room when she needed to do something. And that's how she expressed herself, in this very refined, sophisticated, articulate, subtle way. And sometimes subtlety goes much more beautifully better than someone speaking aggressively. And she knew how to speak out. There were times she had to speak out, she spoke out. But she also tried always the subtle, refined approach. That was who the Rebbetzin was. I remember my mother visited the Rebbetzin with the cousins who came from Russia. My family was very close to the Rebbe and Rebbetzin. So my mother wrote a note to the Rebbetzin, my cousins just came out of Russia and they would love to meet with you. And she asked them 101 questions about Russia, what's going on there. This is when the Iron Curtain fell and they allowed Jews to leave. So they went to Israel and they came to America. So the Rebbetzin subtly looked at her watch to indicate that the Rebbe was coming home and there was time for them to leave. So she didn't say, the Rebbe's coming home now, please leave. And she didn't even get up. She just took a little peek at her watch. My mother noticed. My mother's also very sharp. So my mother says to the cousins, so Rebbetzin, now thank you for seeing us, and we're going to leave now. That who the Rebbetzin was, her I would say, if you want to see real royalty, don't look at the Queen of England. Look at who the Rebbetzin was. That's real royalty. Kol kvuda bas melech panima. The royalty of the royalty of an individual comes from within. When the Rebbetzin would walk into a room, when certain people who have elegant royalty, no one has to point out and say, wow, that's the Queen of England. Wow. Royalty, you feel royalty. When the Rebbetzin would be in a room, you didn't have to question, is that the Rebbetzin? You knew, you felt royalty. And that's who I always want to be. I want to be the person that has royalty, not because of popularity, but because it indicates that your soul is refined and you're connected to God. And it's that connectedness that gives you your royal demeanor, royal energy. That's what I always want to, if I ever want to be like the Rebbetzin, that's what I aspire to be. When we walk in a room, a person knows that you are a reflection of God's energy in this world. It's felt. You don't need to say, hey, everybody, I'm the most pious person in the room. I'm the Rebbetzin. I'm the holy roller. Sometimes it's not the Rebbetzin. Quite the contrary. Sometimes it's the most unassuming person in the room that has the greatest energy. Why? They're connected to God, to their soul, to who they're meant to be, to their mission in life. That's what gives you your energy. Not if you could shout louder or wear the greatest designer digs. By the way, the Rebbetzin dressed gorgeous, beautifully, elegantly, richly, like a Rebbetzin. No one would say, oh, look, she's a Rebbetzin. You could tell she's wearing a shlump. She's a shlump with, healthy shoes and knee socks. No, the Rebbetzin dressed beautifully, elegantly, gorgeously, and loved when people express their beauty in a positive, refined way. But she was what we call royalty, true royalty. You think of the matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, they were also royalty. This was our royalty. This is who we aspire to be like. So on this day, Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, the neshama of this great Rebbetzin should have an aliyah, and we should all give a little extra tzedakah and say an extra prayer in her memory. And she should be an intervener for God. You're up there, Rebbetzin. Daven, pray, call out for us. that Mashiach should come, because we don't know if we could take this anymore, what's going on in Eretz Yisrael and the world over, the attacks against Jews in the streets. It's like Nazi Germany, nicht eingedacht, chas v'sholem. So Rebbetzin, daven for us, pray for us, intervene for us. That's what we ask on this very special day. Does anybody want to say anything, add anything?
I'd love to talk to your mother at some point about the meeting with her. It's so fascinating.
My mother has so many stories, because I'll tell you another beautiful story, then we'll move on to the Torah portion. My two cousins were sent by my grandparents. My grandparents had a grocery store, but that's because they were immigrants, but they were very connected to the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. My grandfather spoke to the Rebbetzin every day on the phone, every single day. And the Rebbetzin needed some groceries. So my grandfather says to my two first cousins, they're named Bracha and Basia, you take the box over to the Rebbetzin. I don't want to wait for the delivery boy. So they bring the box over to the Rebbetzins door, the back door. They rang the bell. She opens the door. She takes the box and she calls them to come in. She asks them who they are. And they said, wir sind in der Eneklach von Yanka Lipsker. We're the grandchildren of my Gzeide Yanka Lipsker. So she says, girls, thank you for bringing my groceries. I want you to remember one thing. Enjoy life. Enjoy your life. And my cousins speak about this all the time. You know, the Rebbetzin could have said, do a mitzvah, give tzedakah, say a prayer. She said, enjoy life. She gave them what a teenager needs to hear, that serving God in this world is enjoyable. You have to be happy. Every day is a gift. And when they asked the Rebbetzin once in an interview, Rebbetzin, tell us, what moment in your life is the most special moment in your life? And she said, right now is my most special moment in my life. Right now. And that's how you have to look at your life. Right now is your most special moment. Don't wait till you land on Mars. Don't wait till you achieve all your goals. When I get to the top of Mount Everest, I'll be happy. When I make my first million, I'll be happy. When I have my 10 grandchildren, I'll be happy. When my son finally finds a shidduch, I'll be happy. No, the Rebbetzin taught us every moment should be your happiest moment. The moment you're in now should be your moment of most joy and happiness. And she told my cousins, enjoy life. And they both bought themselves bumper stickers, and they have it on their kitchen walls. Not bumper stickers, you know, those wooden plaques that they sell, and they both have it in their kitchens that say enjoy life, because that's what the Rebbetzin told them. And to me, that's so beautiful because it's so relatable. That's who the Rebbe and Rebbetzin were. That's who they were. So I always think to myself, enjoy life. That's what you have to do. And every moment has to be your best moment, the moment you're in now. So I'm glad, Diane, you brought me to those two stories. I just remembered from the Rebbetzins. So now a little bit about the Parsha. Even though I feel like there's so much to say about Israel and what's going on, but let's do a little Torah study about the Parsha. And we just came from a very exciting few weeks of Parsha. There were the plagues, and we left Egypt, and then we came to the desert, and there was the splitting of the Red Sea. And now, Parshas Mishpatim, which means ordinances, we're coming to a more relaxed and maybe boring section. The Jews got the Torah at Sinai. God called out the 10 Commandments. And now Moshe is teaching the Jews the mitzvahs of the Torah. There's one thing to hear God's voice and get the Torah. Now you have to study and do what it says in the Torah, right? And the very opening of this Torah portion is a very interesting thing that says that when God came to the Jews and said, do you want my Torah? You want it? They didn't say, oh, tell us what's in it. If you want me to do what's in it, then maybe I'll take it. But first tell me what it is. They said, Nasa, we will do, Vinishma, and then you could tell us what we have to do. And we know that the revelation at Sinai, where we discussed that heaven and earth met, God came down and met the Jewish people, and heaven and earth kissed, says the Kabbalah, and meshed the two worlds together, where now the mundane can infect the spiritual. Something unholy can become holy, like money, when we use it for a good cause. This is what Torah brought to the world. But the concept of the Sinai experience is a metaphor for the cosmic marriage between God and the Jewish people. God is the groom, the Jewish people are the bride. God held the mountain over our heads. That's the veil and the chuppah that we have over us when we get married. And the 10 Commandments is the marriage certificate, the ketubah. And we encircle the mountain, the Jewish nation, that's the ring that the groom gives the bride. And when we stood at the mountain and God said, "Do you want my Torah?" We said, "Yes." And now tell us what's in it. That's the secret to relationship and marriage. Why does the husband bring flowers, to your wife? It's a custom. Erev Shabbos, Friday, the husband brings flowers to the wife. It's a very beautiful custom. One of the reasons is because though it was a mountain, Mount Sinai, flowers grew around it to adorn this magnificent mountain during the giving of the Torah. But also flowers define what a real relationship is. A real relationship between husband and wife is not about like what Diane and I discussed. Do you want to be right or you want to be happy? Flowers really, you think about it, it's not jewelry. It's not diamonds are forever. Your husband brings you flowers, you put it in a vase, and after Shabbos, it wilts usually. Sometimes it lasts longer. And he may not even like flowers, your husband. He brings flowers only because he wants to show his love for you. Flowers are really an indicator that I love you. I'm not bringing a case of beer for Shabbos because I love beer. I want to make my wife happy. My wife doesn't even like beer. In a relationship, it's nasa. You do and then you hear. You don't do because it makes sense. You do it because you love your wife. She does it because she loves you, not because she wants to. Sometimes it's only because it's good for the relationship. So Nasa defines how to have a good relationship in your marriage. Do it. And then I'll hear about it. Now, tell me why I should do it, honey. I don't know if this makes sense. I don't know if it's logical I should bring you flowers every week. Think about it. $5,000, $5,000, $5,000, $5,000. Yeah, not $1,000 and $1,000 we could pay for a new sofa or a new necklace, maybe. It's not practical flowers. It's not financially savvy. Nasa, you do it. Not because it always makes sense. It's because it brings love and excitement to the relationship. It's not always logical. It's not always about what's in it for me. It's what's in it for you. So that's what the Nasa and Minishma, that the Jews didn't even say, God, first tell us what's in the marriage contract. Then we'll decide if we want to marry you. They said, we will do, and then we will hear. That's the secret to a happy marriage. It's not always you're right. If you want to be right, you're not going to be happy. Of course you're right. Your husband came home 4 hours late. You had a dinner date at 7 o'clock. Now you have to pay the babysitter overtime. Your makeup has melted. Your high heels are killing you. So you can embrace him and say, oh, honey, I thought you were abducted by aliens. I'm so glad you finally made it. Let's run and get it there. Or you could say to your husband, you're always late. As a matter of fact, your father is always late. Your grandfather is always late. It's genetic. You're always, and you ruin the whole evening. And either you don't end up going or you go and you're both not talking to each other the whole night. So you're right. But do you want to be happy or you want to be right? Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do, then we'll hear. That's the secret to a happy marriage. And this is how the Jews start with the giving of the Torah. And now God, of course, through Moshe, has to tell the Jews how to keep the Torah. Ve'ela ha'mishpatim, it starts off. These are the ordinances of the Torah. So what's mishpatim? Mishpatim is the third category of mitzvahs. We have chokim, edus, and mishpatim. Chokim are decrees. God doesn't tell us why God gave us these mitzvahs, but God gave us these mitzvahs. Who knows an example of a chok? Kosher, going to the mikvah. During the time of the Beis Hamikdash, the mitzvah of purification with the red heifer, the ashes of the red cow, which is the red heifer. Wool and linen, shatnez. We don't wear wool and linen in one garment. But you can wear wool socks and a linen scarf, but together in one garment, you don't wear it together. That's a chok, a decree. We don't know the reason, but we do it because God said so. Doesn't mean we can't research the reason, but we're not given a reason. But again, it's hidden in the Torah, the reasoning. The second type is edus, a mitzvah we do because it's remembering and a testimony to something that happened in Jewish life. For example, matzah is a mitzvah to eat on Pesach, to remember how we were freed from slavery in Egypt. We sit in the sukkah on Sukkot to remember how the clouds of glory of God protected us in the desert. These are mitzvahs called edus, testimony. We do it as a testimony to God's, to what happened in our relationship with God in our history. And the last category of mitzvahs are called ordinances, common sense mitzvahs that we can very much rationalize. It's logical. It's in the Constitution. Don't kill, don't steal, don't kidnap, don't be jealous, don't commit adultery. Things that make sense. So if they make sense, why did God put it in the Torah? Anyway, you would do it. Does anybody know why? Why put common sense, moral and ethical values in the Torah? We'll do it anyway. So there's two answers. One is, first of all, not necessarily. If society decides one day that killing is logical, euthanasia is logical, abortion is ethical, the Torah comes and says no. So when society evolves, so to speak, and decides certain mitzvahs, commandments of God are no longer applicable, comes the Torah and says they are applicable. And the second analysis is it that just like you do the mitzvah of a decree because God said so, we don't eat kosher necessarily because it makes sense. We eat kosher because God said so. Don't mix milk and meat. Slaughter the animal with special ritual rules, humanely, and so on. Just like we do that because God said so, not because we necessarily logically understand it, the mitzvahs that make sense, we should also do because God said, not because it makes sense. Because remember, logic is also a creation of God. Who created logic? God. Why does it make sense? Because God made it make sense. Again, and were it to come a time where society reneged on a common sense, ethical, moral mitzvah, we have the Torah that says, we don't care what society says. The Torah says otherwise. You cannot kill an old woman just because the doctors gave up hope. You never know. The miracles happen. So we do the mishpatim, the ordinances, in the same way we do the chukim and the edus. Because God said so. Does anybody want to add anything, say anything, have a question? So I want to end off with a little point from the Parsha, just to give a little insight that The Torah portion starts off with the laws of slavery. Part of the laws are the laws of an indentured servant. And you would say, why start off with that? Why not something maybe that's a different topic? Even though in the Torah portion there's the laws of damages. If you're a borrower, a renter, a paid guardian, an unpaid guardian, what happens if somebody gives you an object to watch and you lose it or you break it and so on. But it starts off with the laws of slavery for a very interesting reason. The Jews just left slavery. They were just freed from slavery. So God is telling the Jewish nation, you will no longer ever be allowed to be a slave to humanity. You will not allowed ever to become enslaved by any human being ever again. Now, of course, the Torah has some instances where someone can allow themselves to become what they call an indentured servant. But there's very strict rules and regulations about it. For example, a guy is in horrible debt. He can't pay his mortgage. He can't pay his utility bills. He can't pay his tuition. He can't buy food. He goes to a rich person. He says, listen, I want to work for you. I want to become your indentured servant. And now the owner, the boss, is not only has to pay the servant, he has to take care of the guy's wife and children. That's how strict the rules are. The boss can't say, well, I'll pay you a salary, I'll buy your food, but not your family. If you become an indentured servant, according to the laws of the Torah, the boss has to pay you and take care of your family. And you have to be off for Shabbos. He can't make you work on Shabbos. So there's many rules and regulations to becoming an indentured servant. And then if, let's say, the person works there for 6 years, at the 7th year, the boss has to let you free, says the Torah. But let's say you love it there. The lifestyle is amazing. I'm living in a mansion. My children and my wife are well fed. All our expenses are paid. We get to go skiing with them every year. You like it, says the Torah. You have to have your ear pierced by the doorpost. Why? Because you heard at Sinai that you're not supposed to be a servant anymore. You cannot be enslaved anymore. You heard that at Sinai, that the only person you could be a slave to is God, so to speak. And you still want to be an indentured servant, your ear gets pierced with an owl because you want to stay on as a servant. That's the rule. Because the ear that heard that the only person who can speak metaphorically enslave you is God, you are now a servant to God, but not to any man, is the ear that says, no, I still want to be an indentured servant to my boss. And another time a person can put themselves out or they're forced is when you steal, when you're a thief. You stole $100,000 and you have no way of paying it back. You spent it or you squandered it. You can become a servant to that person who you stole from to work off the money. But again, you're not mistreated. You have to be fed and you have to give house and board and your family has to be taken care of. And you're not abused because you're paying off a debt. You have to be treated right. So even when you are a servant in Jewish law, there are parameters to those, to the job description, so to speak. So it starts off right away with this mitzvah to show us you will never, ever, ever be enslaved again. But if you do choose for whatever dire circumstances, there are rules and regulations how you can be once again an indentured servant, but never, ever, ever a slave like we had in Egypt. And of course, the world did not catch up to that because we see that slavery was a way of life for generations and generations, but not by the Jewish people. You were not allowed to have a servant. If you did, there were very strict rules and like how they're treated, not working on Shabbos, what happens if they get hurt under your jurisdiction, and the many, 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 many laws and mitzvahs connected with having someone be for you what we call an indentured servant. But slavery, in the way it was by the Civil War, or the way it was by the Greeks and the Romans, and they had slaves and all with the Caesars, never ever like that. That is against Jewish law and against halacha. Can never, never be a slave, ever. I want to end off with a story that I heard. It has to do with Israel. I'm sure many of you have heard of the famous Kabbalistic great mystic, Sephardic mystic called the Baba Sali. There's many pictures of him wearing like a white bib hat. And he has children and grandchildren who also are like Baba Salis. But he was this great, great mystic, sage leader in Israel. And he was once being driven by his driver, and he asked his driver to drive in what we call now Gaza. And he drove in, and the Baba Sali went out of the car, took 5 coins, and gave it to 5 non-Jewish kids playing in Gaza. They were playing. He got back in the car, and his driver was driving him back to his home. So he asked the Baba Sali, Rebbe, ma yeshkan? What's going on? Chacham, what's going on? He said, those 5 children that I gave coins to will never, never hurt a Jew. Will never hurt a Jew. This was in Gaza. Anyway, now the war in Gaza, they caught a lot of terrorists and they questioned them. So they said, why did you choose these kibbutzim? And why didn't you keep going to Netanya, which is right by the kibbutzim? The city of Netanya was also very close by. So they heard it from different terrorists, different murderers in different rooms, that they all said the same story. They were about to go into Netanya, and when they drove up to the border of Netanya, a man in a white hat and clothing came down and said, you are never to enter here. And they said it was so horrifying, so scary, that they went back. And they heard this from a few terrorists, different rooms, so they weren't together. And they showed them a picture, and they showed a picture, and it was the Baba Sali. This was after he passed away. The Baba Sali, story is that the terrorists recognized the picture of the Baba Sali. He said that was the angel that dressed in white that did not allow them to enter into Netanya, and that's why they didn't attack Netanya. Netanya was protected by the Baba Sali. I share the story. Why? First of all, to me, it's heartwarming to know that Israel has a power and an energy that is beyond our understanding, but also to know that we are protected. We are protected. We are protected by the power, energy, and the spirituality of Israel. Why these horrific things happen in Israel, I do not know. I don't have an answer. I'm silent to that. But what we're not silent is about that we cry out to God, this cannot happen. This cannot continue happening. You have to protect us. Come show your power. Don't let us question your presence, God. Show us who you are, that you are indeed the protector of the nation of Israel. Why that had to happen, we don't know, God. Only you could tell us. But now's the time to step up and protect us from these barbarians. And let's hope and pray that we will see the redemption, and not redemption in a weird thing, in a weird, that the world will be filled with peace, with goodness, with love, with the presence of God in a revealed way. That we will never have to suffer the horrific tragedies that have happened and continue to happen. This is what we're asking for. This is what Mashiach is. It's that the world is meant to be in a way that there is peace and love and harmony, everyone together, for all the nations, not only for the Jewish people. It'll benefit everyone. And this is what we have to keep davening and praying for every single day, that Mashiach should come and God's light should fill the world. And we'll do it by doing mitzvahs, lighting Shabbos candles, giving extra tzedakah, saying a prayer, eating kosher, taking a stand for our Torah and for our mitzvahs. God sees the outpouring from Klal Yisrael. What more will God want and need?